Long before the first humans stood upright and took their place in the world, there was a beautiful land that was ruled by what many would come to call the Fae. These ancient beings were worshipped by mankind, but they were also feared. Humans were right to be afraid, for there were many different creatures that lived in the darkness, watching us, waiting. Most were harmless enough, amusing themselves by causing mischief and playing pranks on humans that crossed their paths. However, some had more sinister intentions. The irkling, for example, have developed a liking for the taste of human children. These monsters are small, unnaturally fast, and impossible to kill. It was an unlucky tragedy for my people that we decided to build our village here, right in the middle of the irklings' territory. We have lost so many of our children over this past year. There aren't enough tears in this world to weep for their loss. Thankfully, though, my grandmother taught me well in the ways of my druid ancestors. I may not be able to kill the little beasts, but I was able to work out a spell that binds them to this book. I can only hide it and pray that it never falls into the hands of a child. If you are reading this, know that I'm truly sorry for the demons that have now been passed on to you. Opening the book will have awakened them, and I'm sure they will be ravenously hungry. Once the book is opened, you must read it out loud from beginning to end, in order to return them to their magical prison. Be watchful. They only attack if you don't see them coming. Most importantly, once you finish this book, keep it hidden so that no one ever opens it again.
WIGS-FM 98.7 Game Talk.
Hello, darkness. My name is Nick Gloom. It's just me tonight. As you guys know, we answer game questions and talk tips and tricks. Well, Nate usually does. I don't really play most of those games. Anyway, let's get to the phones. First caller, you're on the air.
Hi, Nick. I'm wondering, how do I beat the final boss in Terminator Destruction?
How would I know that?
Oh, I don't know.
I'm stuck here working for crap money. I still can't afford to buy new Atari games. Would you like me to page Nate?
I don't know.
Here's the thing. Like I said, I'm working here. I don't usually come on the radio. So, I don't have as much of a bedside manner as Nate does. But it's totally fine. I bought a new OBasic book, which is the programming language for Atari, since I can't afford to buy my own Atari games, and I'm working on my own homebrew game. The pending title is Evil Midnight, where I'm not sure what you're going to have to do yet, but I think it's going to be a horror game, and it's going to be at nighttime, and it's going to be evil. Basically, you would do something all night, and then you would win. It's kind of like working here. I try to keep my head down all night, but Janet asks me to go on the air, and I'm always getting asked to do stuff. The more stuff I get asked to do, the more I get anxious and panic. It's a vicious cycle.
Is this some kind of life lesson? I just want to play Terminator.
Here's the thing.
Little Maggie O'Brien was the first. The children had been playing in Hogan's Forest when they all heard a noise. Sensing no danger because there were so many of them, 12 children in all decided to investigate the source of the strange sound. As they all searched high and low, they soon realized that Maggie was missing. Frantically, they began searching for their friend. She was a small girl who loved to play hide and seek. Her big brother Colin insisted that she was probably hiding somewhere, safe and giggling to herself as she watched everyone search for her. The sun sank low in the sky and the forest grew dark. The children, frustrated and panicked, ran back to the village to alert their parents that little Maggie was nowhere to be found. That's when everyone lit torches and spread out through the woods, calling her name. The little girl's mother sobbed desperately as we all inspected every corner of those woods in hopes of finding her. Her brother kept searching, tears streaming down his cheeks.
I'm her big brother,
He said, rubbing his eyes.
I'm supposed to make sure nothing happens to her.
It's not your fault, Colin, I assured him. We'll find her soon, and she'll be no worse for the wear. He nodded, forced a smile, and we all continued looking. The moment I heard him scream, I knew he had found her. Or rather, what was left of her, which wasn't much. We were sure it was Maggie because she had worn her favorite hair bow that day. Her father plucked the pink ribbon from the body and fell to his knees, wailing into the darkness. Poor Colin tried to tell us then. He said that she had been covered in what he described as little green men.
They were fat and green?
He stammered.
With bright glowing eyes. They were biting off bits of skin and flesh.
No one believed the lad. We all attributed the horrible ordeal to a hungry wild animal. Of course, what else could it possibly be? Scooping up what remained of little Maggie, the townsfolk set to work preparing for her funeral. We had no idea the horrors that lay ahead. I thought to myself how strange her wounds looked. I couldn't help but think back to what Colin had said about the little green men. It made me think of the stories my grandmother used to tell me. She said that our druid ancestors spoke of tiny creatures. that lived long ago in the swamps and marshes surrounding our lands. The irklings, she called them. There were 3 tribes, each being their own breed of evil. One tribe, I recall, she said were green and fat. They would lure children away from safety and feast on their flesh. We didn't live near any swamps. Surely the boy's mind was playing tricks on him. Besides, the irklings weren't real. They couldn't be. Maggie O'Brien's funeral was just what anyone would expect. Everyone did their best Everyone did their best to comfort the grieving parents. Colin kept to himself. Everyone assumed it was because he blamed himself. After his sister had been laid to rest, I came to him to ask him how he was doing. He looked up at me, eyes red from either crying, lack of sleep, or a combination of the two, and said,
I really saw them. The little green monsters.
My heart ached as I put my arms around the boy. I kept telling myself that seeing his little sister in pieces couldn't have been easy for him. He was just in shock. The stories of the irklings were only told to scare children into doing what they were told. That was all. The first thing my grandmother told me about the irklings was that there were 3 tribes. The green ones had round bellies and piercing blue eyes. She said they could be heard if you walked deep in the swamp at night. They would laugh and sing as they danced around their tiny campfires, which would appear only as tiny flickering lights through the trees. They were the least lethal of the 3 tribes, but every bit as evil. The red ones were more temperamental and even faster than their green cousins. They didn't sing or dance around campfires, and their celebrations were a bit more gruesome. They prefer to eat children from the inside out. It was even thought by some that they were only red because they were stained by the blood of their victims. Fiery red, bristle-like hairs sprouted from the tops of their heads, and their glowing yellow eyes seemed cold and calculating. The pale irklings were in another class altogether. They had white skin and wild, untamed blue hair that flowed out in every direction. The most unsettling thing about them was that they had no eyes at all, yet they somehow were the most keen and efficient killers of the 3. Grandmother said that their long, wiry hair could somehow sense the presence and locations of children. There were some things that all 3 tribes had in common. Irklings preferred to eat after midnight and would only attack if the child didn't make direct eye contact with them. I reassured myself that the O'Brien girl being attacked barely after sunset meant that she had to have been the victim of a wild animal attack. A few of the men in the village came together to hunt down the beast that killed the girl. They came back 2 days later, carrying the carcass of a large wolf. The whole village breathed a sigh of relief, and a big celebration was held. The only one besides myself that remained anxious was Colin. Looking at his face that night, I knew that he believed the creatures that killed Maggie were still out there, waiting. He was right.
WIGS-FM 98.7 Game Talk.
Hello, darkness. Welcome to the top of the hour. Again, I'm your host, Nick Gloom, filling in for Nate tonight. That was an interesting hour, I must say. I don't know, Janet. I feel like these kids don't like me. Hey, Janet, do you like me? And she's walking away, folks. Anyway, caller, you're on the air.
Hey, Nick. Just calling in, wanted to say that you suck.
I just had a feeling that that was coming. I feel like I'm not as approachable as Nate is. Oh yeah, so anyway, I forgot there's a sponsor slot I was supposed to fill last hour. This one goes out to all you greasy, pizza-faced listeners. Are you tired of popping pimples?
Ew, gross.
Do some zits appear over and over and you have to keep popping them?
Gross.
Kind of like that popular video game, Mole Whacker? From the creators of Simple Pimple comes the revolutionary cream, Pimple Buster. The all-in-one, scientifically formulated pimple-destroying cream. Call 155-PIM-PLES. But hurry before supplies run out. That's 155-PIMPLES. You know, Janet, I think Evil Midnight could use some Mole Whacker inspiration. Something to keep the player on their toes. Or at least that last prank caller could drink some of that Pimple Buster. I don't know what it is.
The next day, Maggie's mother visited her daughter's grave, discovering something that was more than a little strange. The earth on The earth on the grave was disturbed, as if something had clawed its way out. I couldn't help but remember what grandmother had said about the red irklings. They would burrow inside their victims and eat their way out. Could it be that we brought a whole tribe of them right into the village without even knowing it? The answer would come soon enough. Jacob McLaren was found torn to shreds in his bed the following morning. Obviously, a wild animal hadn't attacked him inside his own house. Another devastated family and another funeral this soon after Maggie didn't sit well with anyone. The atmosphere became even more tense and uncomfortable. I insisted on inspecting Jacob's remains myself just to reassure myself that there was nothing hiding inside. Colin approached me afterwards, asking what I was looking for. I told him it was nothing, but he knew better.
You believe me about the monsters, don't you?
His young face was determined as he spoke.
You're the only one that doesn't look at me like I'm crazy.
I swallowed hard, started to deny it, but the words caught in my throat, and as much as I tried, I couldn't lie. Listen, I put my hands on his shoulders. I don't think you're crazy, but we need to be sure of what we're dealing with before we spark a full-blown panic. Tell me exactly what happened. Colin took a deep breath, working up his nerve.
It was so dark, but I had a good torch. I called her name over and over. She didn't answer. Then Then I heard something. It sounded like chewing. It sounded like chewing. I took a few more steps and I saw her laying there. All over her were these fat little green monsters. They had mouthfuls of pointy teeth that looked like needles and massive clawed hands. Just then a twig snapped under my foot and they all stopped what they were doing and looked right at me. That's when I screamed and they scattered. They were gone before any of the grown-ups got to me.
His eyes filled with tears at the memory.
Please, tell me what they are.
He was no more than 11 or 12, having just lost his sister and now his friend. No one had believed him when he tried to tell us before. It couldn't have been easy, but he opened up to me. I felt it only right that I tell him what I knew. We sat together by the bonfire late into the night, and I told him all the old stories. Unfortunately, the one thing that my grandmother hadn't mentioned was how to get rid of them. Looking into the flames, I got an idea. I knew that most unholy creatures were repelled by fire.
Well,
Colin folded his arms.
we would just have to test what happens to an Earthling when it's on fire.
Colin wanted to tell his friends about the irklings, but I begged him to keep it a secret. If anyone knew that my grandmother had passed down her druidic teachings, it would only take one person to scream "witch," and I would be as good as dead. Colin wanted to tell his friends about the irklings, but I begged him to keep it a secret. Colin wanted to tell his friends about the irklings, but I begged him to keep it a secret. If anyone knew that my grandmother had passed down her druidic teachings, it would only take one person to scream "witch," and I would be as good as dead. He agreed and kept my secret. I mixed a potion that would catch fire when touched by the tiniest flame. Surely this would send it screaming to the underworld. He sat quietly in his bed and waited, knowing he mustn't look them in the eye. He must let it attack, for this would be the only way to get close to it. Just after the stroke of midnight, he began to hear them chuckling and shuffling around in the dark. Clutching the potion bottle, hands trembling, he lowered his gaze and braced himself. Sure enough, one of them leapt from his bookshelf and sank its teeth into the flesh of his arm. He screamed and unstopped the bottle, emptying the contents over the green irkling. It tore a tiny round chunk from his arm and gulped it down just as Colin shoved a candle right into its face. It lit up like a torch and made a horrific, high-pitched scream as it ran around the room trying to put itself out. The curtains caught fire as 4 more irklings sprung out from their hiding places. Colin ran outside, screaming and cradling his blood-soaked arm. His parents soon joined him outside in a panic, trying to figure out what had happened. Just then, a tiny fireball came racing through the doorway and zigzagged towards the woods. I grabbed an empty glass jar from my cupboard and ran after it. The jar made a thunk sound as it landed over the flaming irkling, and the fire quickly went out. To my horror, this thing wasn't dead. It didn't even look like it was dying. Though blackened from the being set ablaze, it was just as spunky as ever. I quickly scooped up the jar and screwed the lid on. As I made my way back, some of the villagers were trying to put out the fire inside the house, and others were tending to Colin's arm, telling him that it must have been a rat. "I've never seen a rat quite like this," I shouted, and held the jar up high so everyone could see. The instant they all looked in my direction, their jaws dropped open, and Colin's face lit up for the first time since he'd lost his sister. He knew everyone finally saw that he had been telling the truth all along, and they all felt terribly ashamed for not believing him in the first place. Unfortunately, the joy of this small victory was short-lived. For over the next 3 days, we tried every method we could think of to kill the little wretch, but no matter what horrific thing we did, it wouldn't die.
WIGS-FM 98.7 Game Talk.
Hello, darkness. I'm your host, Nick Gloom, in for Nate tonight, as we dive deep into Game Talk. Sorry about those technical issues we experienced last hour. I think Janet might have fallen asleep. For those of you that missed it, we were having an interesting discussion about game difficulty and learning curves. You know, Nate likes Dragons and Dungeons, but apparently I'm dumb for thinking it's too difficult. Apparently, kids can play it. So what do I know? Kinda like my work in progress, Evil Midnight, which, as I mentioned earlier, if you weren't around, is going to be more of a horror game. I'm not really sure, but I would imagine, in a game like that, confusing the player could be an evil tactic. Something like grooming them up to expect one thing, and then yank the rug out, so to speak. Anyway, I'm rambling. Hello, caller, you're on Game Talk. Must have lost him. Hello, caller, you're on Game Talk. Very funny, guys. Caller, you're on Game Talk.
First, we tried drowning it. We even had the priest bring us holy water when water from the well didn't work. We cut off its head, but as soon as we snipped its neck, the head grew a new body, and the body grew a new head. Then we had 2 angry irklings in jars. It was immune to every kind of poison that we knew of. It could heal quickly from any cuts it sustained. We even tried squashing it flat, but it would just puff back up in a matter of a few minutes. By this point, the irklings had infested every corner of the village. Parents had to stand guard over their sleeping children. Between the stroke of midnight and the first light of dawn, they became absolutely ravenous. It appeared that there was nothing else we could do. As much as I hated the thought of disturbing my grandmother, I knew that she was the only one that might be able to give me any insight as to how I could get rid of them. I asked Colin to meet me in secret at her grave. I brought grandmother's old spirit board with me, which had every letter of the alphabet on it. Colin and I placed a small glass cup upside down in the center of the board and waited. The idea was that her spirit would guide the cup to the letters, and in doing so, spell out a message to me. "Grandmother," I spoke aloud. "I really need your help. Speak to us. Your magic is the only thing that can save these children." We waited, but we were met with only silence. Please, grandmother," I pleaded. "I don't know what to do. I would do anything to save these children. Anything. Just tell me what to do, please." I begged her to answer me, but the glass didn't move, and no answer would come from the spirit board that night. As we snuck back to the village, we were greeted with the news of 3 more deaths. The widow Adams had fallen asleep guarding her 3 little ones. She always worked so hard, toiling in the fields from dawn until dusk to make sure her family was fed. After she lost her husband to sickness, she was the only caretaker for her children. Now they were gone too, and she was truly alone. As I lay in my bed crying, I felt responsible for what was happening. I hadn't paid much attention as a child when my grandmother tried to teach me the old ways. If I had been a better student, I could have spared my people so much misery and death. Eventually, I drifted off to sleep. It was only then that my grandmother finally came to me in a dream and told me what I must do if I wanted to rid the village of the irklings once and for all. But their imprisonment would come at a terrible price. I found myself walking through the dark forest. The damp earth under my bare feet felt cool and mossy. In the distance, I could hear drums. A bright light was shining through the trees. I continued cautiously, unsure of what to expect when I entered the clearing. As I came closer, I could see people dancing around the fire. A beautiful woman stood with her hands outstretched towards the sky. It took a moment before I recognized her. Grandmother? Is that you?
Hello, dear. I heard your call, but I could not come to you. I had to wait until you fell asleep to bring you here.
What is this place? I asked, looking around.
This is where all of our people go when their time on Earth ends.
Can I stay here with you?
No, my darling. I'm afraid you can't.
I could see the sorrow in her eyes as she put a sympathetic hand on my cheek.
In fact, if you really mean to imprison all the Irklings, you will never be allowed to take your place here.
My heart sank like a stone. What do you mean?
If you wish to trap them, your immortal soul will be lost forever. Do you understand? Do you understand?
I bit my lip as I thought of Maggie, Jacob, and the 3 Adams children. I couldn't even imagine the horror they must have felt during their final moments. Then I pictured Colin and the other children of the village. I simply couldn't bear to let the Irklings pick them off one by one. Soon we would have no children left. I couldn't let that happen, no matter the cost. Tell me what I must do. My grandmother's expression grew dark as she described the ingredients to 2 potions. Then she explained the details of the spell I would have to perform to trap them within a cursed tome forever. As she spoke, I could feel my blood run cold, and a horrible chill spread through my entire body. My throat became so dry that I could hardly speak. I can't, I managed to say. No. No, I can't do this. I stumbled backwards, feeling sick to my stomach.
You must. If you don't finish every step exactly as I say, the Irklings will never stop.
I fell to my knees and put my hands over my face. Please, there must be another way.
I don't make the rules, my dear. I can only tell you the way things are.
I sobbed pitifully, and my grandmother knelt down, putting her arms around me and holding me close.
The right thing to do is rarely the easiest. Be strong,
She whispered. she whispered as I woke.
Be strong.
As soon as I opened my eyes, I began to question the dream. Did my grandmother's spirit really visit me, or was it just my anxious mind playing tricks on me? In my heart, I knew. I had to cast this spell. I had to save them. I searched Hogan's forest for the various herbs I would need to brew 2 potions. I smelled the sweet perfume of the forest air and listened to the songs of the birds and insects of the woods, knowing that it would be the last time I would ever get to enjoy them. Once I gathered all my ingredients, I found Colin and told him that I knew how to end the Irkling's reign of darkness, but that I would need his help. I didn't tell him what was about to happen. I couldn't find the courage. Not to mention, if he knew what I was about to do, he would do everything in his power to stop me. He was a good boy. I never had the privilege of having children of my own, but if I had, I would have wanted them to be just like Colin O'Brien. Brave, honest, and kind. Together, we walked into the deepest part of Hogan's forest. The old stone ruins marked a sacred place where our ancestors used to honor the ancient woodland spirits. 12 large rectangular stones stood in a massive circle. I sat my pack down and opened it up, taking out this very book. I opened it to the first page and laid it in the center of the circle. Next, I took out the 2 potions, one black. Next, I took out the 2 potions, one black and one white. I gave Colin the small bottle that held the black liquid. You will need to drink this. It will protect you. It will protect you. He frowned for a moment as he inspected the murky potion, but obediently pulled the stopper out of the bottle and drank it down.
Ugh, that was awful.
I smiled. Well, I don't plan on making you drink it again. I took the white potion and drank it, trying not to think about the fact that it was sealing my fate.
Something doesn't feel right.
Colin started wobbling. I'm sorry, my boy, I said sincerely. Truly I am. His eyes rolled back, and he fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. When he woke, he found himself bound with rope and blindfolded. The black potion, you see, had 3 functions. It was infused with herbs that would make him first and foremost irresistible to every Irkling within 100 miles. Secondly, it contained the binding agent that would ensnare the creatures and keep them forever trapped in a pocket dimension that could only be opened using this cursed book. Thirdly, it incapacitated him long enough for me to finish the remaining steps of the spell. You see, while he was unconscious, I was writing this book. As I pen these final words, I can already see my skin turning white. My hair has mostly fallen out, and long blue hair is growing in. At first I thought Colin was getting bigger, but I see now that I'm slowly shrinking. My vision is fading. I can hear the others coming. I keep telling Colin not to be afraid, that it will all be over soon. After we eat him, we will all be trapped in the book. His screams will be the last thing I hear. Please forgive me, for I can never forgive myself.